Hello, homies. That is homies. Welcome to today's video. Today, what are we going to be talking about? Well, it's self-explanatory. It's in the title. Unless you're like, I don't know, mentally not there. We're talking about, like me, we're talking about the psych ward today. Um, my first experience and first ever time going to the psych ward in Portland, Oregon. So I was homeless at the time, and I decided, I'm going to give a little backstory here. I decided to walk in the middle of the street and stop traffic with my little suitcase because I was mentally ill. And they called the cops. The entire traffic backed up for me as I walked forward. And they called the cops. The cops came and they're like, "Are you okay? Are you hurt?" I was like, "No, I'm not hurt. I'm just not feeling right." And they said, "Okay, let me call you an ambulance." So they called me an ambulance. Uh, they asked if I had a home. I told them, "No, I'm homeless." And so they called an ambulance. The ambulance picked me up and they asked me, "Would you prefer a hospital that's Christian towards your faith, or would you prefer a hospital that's just by itself?" And I was like, "I'd prefer a hospital that's Christian faith because I'm a Christian." And so they took me to the Christian hospital, at least quote unquote Christian. And I walked in there. I didn't really walk in there. They had me on a stretcher with the thing. They tied me down. They do that for every mental health patient that they get. They tie you down on a stretcher. So they rolled me in there and then they untied me. I got my grippy socks and they gave me my downs or whatever they're called. The why can't I remember what they're called? They gave me something. The scrubs. That's what they're called. They gave me scrubs, and after giving me scrubs, they basically took my personal items as they do with everybody else. If this is onboarding or intake, that's what it's called, intake. They took all my items. They took my phone as well, and they started interviewing me. They had a pencil. There was three people. There was one that had a MacBook, one that had a pen and pad, and then one that was just listening. Like they were intrigued that I was there, like trying to figure me out. Upon reflection, I realized they're just doctors, and that's what they're there for, is to try to diagnose you. But they asked me questions like, "What's your faith?" And I'm like, "Christian." And then they asked me, "Have you had any visions?" And I was like, "Yeah, plenty. I saw God." That'll be a video for another day. And they're like, "Oh, okay." And then they asked me to tell them about it. So I told them about it. And then eventually they're like, "Okay, so we're going to put you in intake and we're going to give you the right medication and we're going to send you home." And I was like, "Okay, perfect." So they put me in a padded cell. Not intake, a padded cell. Intake is normally there's a commons area and you get your own room and there's like 30 other people there. This was not intake. This was a padded room by itself, completely padded. There was a mattress on the floor, a green inflatable mattress on the floor, and the walls were white. And the door was thick as lead. Like, not wood, but metal. And there was a window so nobody could hear me. I started crying and screaming because I was afraid. I didn't know what to do. I was scared shitless. And nobody ever heard me cry or scream. I even waved at the people walking by and they just looked at me and then looked away. Like I knew they were acknowledging me. You feel less than human. They acknowledged me, but they wouldn't do anything. Like I felt like an animal trapped in there, and it was terrible. Anyway, I started crying and saying, "I want to die, I want to die," because I was still mentally ill. I hadn't gotten my medication yet. And what do? They come in there, they race in there, and as soon as I said that, they race in there and they force feed me like 8 separate pills in one thing. 8 pills, as if they were trying to kill me or something. They never told me what these pills were. They were all different, by the way. It was like every antipsychotic you could imagine they gave me. And that shit knocked me the fuck out. I was out. O-U-T. And so I fell asleep. And when I woke up, I was in a room. I was no longer in the cell. I was in a room. Who knows what they did to me. But I was in a room in the intake. And when I was in a room, they basically gave me an iPad so I could fart around with. And there was computers as well. And they started getting me a case manager or a caseworker. Here was pretty chill. I had one mental breakdown. I started screaming and I ran towards the exit when the door opened, and I left. I got out of the intake and I started running down the halls, and then they got me. Security caught me, knocked me to the ground, and then they put me in another padded cell, valid this time, completely valid. Um, but point being is it was scary. And moving onward, I finally chilled out. They got me on risperidone. Risperidone worked really well for me, the pill. I think it was like 20 milligrams, something like that, maybe 30. And it mellowed me out. It just made me a little depressed. Now that I think back on it, I like Abilify more, but it's not perfect. I can still hear voices talking to me. Um, Whereas on risperidone, I couldn't. So I'm going to talk to my doctor about that soon. Um, Point being, don't go to the psych ward. It's terrible. This is just my first experience going to the psych ward. I have multiple stories, but this is just my first story. There's one guy who screamed and was yelling, and security had to take him to a padded cell. He would not stop yelling and crying and wailing, and he even threw fists at the security there. It was crazy. Everybody thought they were in danger. Um, and they always injected me with needles. They injected me with so many needles. It wasn't to draw blood either. It was to give me like saline or some shit. It was ridiculous. I wasn't under the influence of any drugs, so why would they give me saline? It just made no sense. Their practices there were terrible. I wish I remembered the name of the hospital so I could sue them, because their practices were not humane whatsoever. I pray for you guys if you're going to the psych ward. I pray for your family members if you have to put one in the psych ward, because there's good ones and there's really bad ones. Please look at reviews before you send a family member to the psych ward, okay? Please. I know you're angry at them or upset because they're upset, but it's worth your time investment to find the right psych ward to take them to, the right hospital. Anyway, homies, that's today's video. Thank you for watching. I appreciate your time. Love yourself. Have a great rest of your night, evening, or afternoon, morning. Doesn't matter. And that's been just Jake. Zai Jin, yo.